The weakest cadet in the academy was a human. 72 hours later, no one wanted to fight him. Vexthor had seen exactly 347 species pass through the Galactic Defense Academy in his 20-year tenure as chief combat instructor, and not one of them had ever made him question his life choices quite like the creature standing in his doorway right now. The thing was tiny. Well, not tiny by absolute standards, Vexthor supposed, but compared to the hulking Thraxians, or the sleek, deadly Centauri already assembled in the training hall, this human looked like someone's lost pet. Daniels, the roster said. Just Daniels, no clan identifier, no hive designation, no pack number. Humans apparently did not believe in proper naming conventions, which figured, because they also did not believe in proper anything else either, judging by the specimen before him. Vexthor's secondary eyes tracked the human's movement as Daniels shuffled into the hall, clutching a standard-issue duffel bag that looked almost comically oversized against that frame. The creature's skin was this weird peachy tan color that reminded Vexthor of undercooked protein paste, and instead of proper scales, chitin, or even decent fur, it just had this smooth, vulnerable-looking flesh that seemed designed specifically to be torn open by anything sharper than a strong opinion. "You have got to be joking," rumbled Gorza, the Thraxian whose shoulder spikes could puncture hull plating. The massive reptilian leaned over to her neighbor, not even bothering to lower her voice. That is what had the council arguing for 6 cycles. That little thing. Quilon, the Centauri with chrome-like exoskeleton and reflexes faster than most species could perceive, made a clicking sound that passed for laughter among his kind. "I have seen larger parasites removed from cargo shipments. Perhaps it is not the cadet. Perhaps it is the cadet's lunch?" Koresh, whose species literally evolved in the vacuum of space and could survive on solar radiation alone, extended one of their crystalline appendages toward Daniels in what might have been curiosity or might have been the precursor to a dissection. The bipedal configuration is inefficient. The limb-to-body ratio suggests poor load distribution. I calculate a 73.6% probability of structural failure under standard training conditions. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in irritation, though he could not exactly argue with the assessments. When the Galactic Council had finally, after decades of debate and 2 failed applications, granted humanity admission to the Defense Academy, Vexthor had expected something impressive. The humans had fought off the Exercer Centauri incursion at their colony on Proxima Centauri after all. They had held the line at Terra Nova for 16 days against impossible odds. Their ships, while primitive, had shown up in the Kepler conflict and contributed to the Allied victory. So naturally, Vexthor had assumed human warriors would be these towering, terrifying creatures of violence and aggression. He had prepared himself for something dangerous. What he got was Daniels, who stood maybe 6 feet tall, weighed perhaps 170 pounds soaking wet, and looked like a stiff breeze would snap those thin bones like dried twigs. The human's eyes, Vexthor noticed, were darting around the room, taking in every exit, every weapon mount, every other cadet with an expression that Vexthor could not quite parse. Fear? Probably. Intelligence? Maybe. Suicidal optimism? Almost certainly. "Cadet Daniels," Vexthor called out, his translator rendering his native Krillian into something approximating galactic standard. "You are late." "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." The human's voice was higher pitched than Vexthor had expected, lacking the subsonic rumble of proper warrior species. The gravity plating in Sector 7 was calibrated for Jovian standard. Took me a minute to adjust without, throwing up. Snickers rippled through the assembled cadets. Wonderful. The human could not even handle a gravity shift without biological malfunction. This was going to be a very long training cycle. Vexthor gestured with his upper manipulator limbs toward the formation. "Join the others. Try not to die before lunch." As Daniel scurried to find a spot in the ranks wedging between 2 Voltraxians who shifted away like the human might be contagious, Vexthor pulled up the official Academy directive on his data slate. The message from the Council was clear: Humanity had been admitted under the Emerging Species Protocol, and their cadets were to receive full training opportunities without discrimination. What the directive did not say, but what Vexthor understood perfectly well, was that this was a political decision. Humanity had resources the galaxy wanted. Humans had fought well enough in recent conflicts to earn a seat at the table, but nobody, not one single council member, actually believed humans would make it through academy training. This was a formality, a gesture, a way to tell humanity, we tried, but your species simply is not cut out for this. Vexthor looked at Daniels again, noting how the human's chest heaved with the effort of just standing in standard gravity, how those soft fingers trembled slightly, how utterly unprepared this creature seemed for what was coming. He gave the human 3 days. 4, maximum, if Daniels was stubborn. Vexthor had no idea how wrong he was about to be. The gravity chamber was every new cadet's introduction to suffering, and Vexthor took a particular satisfaction in watching overconfident recruits learn humility at 2.5 times standard gravity. He had seen cadets pass out, vomit, and on one memorable occasion, actually compress 3 vertebrae. The chamber did not care about your species' reputation. Physics was beautifully impartial that way. Gorsa went first, because of course she did. The Thraxian stepped into the chamber like she was going for a casual stroll, and when Vexthor cranked the gravity to 2.5 standard, she did not even slow down. She completed the required 50-meter course in 47 seconds, emerging with barely elevated respiration. Show off. Quilon managed it in 32 seconds, his exoskeleton distributing the load with mechanical efficiency. Koresh simply floated through, because Voidborn did not actually care about gravity in the traditional sense, which Vexthor privately felt was cheating, but the regulations allowed it. Then came Daniels. The human stepped into the chamber, and Vexthor saw those legs immediately start shaking. Not trembling, shaking. Like the bones themselves were protesting the fundamental concept of what was happening. At 2.5 standard, Daniels probably weighed something close to 400 pounds, and that skeletal structure clearly had opinions about this fact. You may withdraw, Cadet, Vexthor offered, almost hoping the human would take the out. No shame in recognizing physiological limitations. Daniels looked up at him, sweat already beading on that ridiculous smooth skin, and said, "No, sir." What followed was perhaps the most painful thing Vexthor had witnessed in his entire career. Daniels moved through that course one agonizing step at a time, breath coming in ragged gasps, face turning an alarming shade of red that definitely indicated some kind of internal distress. The human got up, fell again, got up again, muscles visibly spasmed under that thin skin. At one point, Vexthor was certain he heard something pop in the human's knee. Daniels finished in 9 minutes and 14 seconds. The next slowest time was 1 minute and 47 seconds. "I am setting up a betting pool," Gorsa announced to the other cadets as they moved the strength trials. "How long before the human washes out?" "I am thinking 72 hours. Too generous," Quilon chittered. 48 maximum. Did you see that pathetic display? I have seen civilian transport pilots with better physical conditioning. Koresh's crystalline form shimmered thoughtfully. "I propose 36 hours. The structural damage already sustained suggests cascading failure is imminent." The strength trials did not improve Daniels' standing. The human managed to lift 190 pounds overhead, which sounded impressive until you realized that Gorsa had just casually pressed 840 pounds like she was rearranging furniture. Quilon's exoskeleton-assisted lift hit 630. Even the smallest cadet present, a Peltharian who stood 4 feet tall, managed 312. Daniels's 190 looked absolutely comical in comparison. "Perhaps the human is actually a juvenile," suggested one of the Voltraxians, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Surely they would not send an adult this week." No, another cadet chimed in, one of the insectoid chitterlings whose name Vexthor had not bothered learning yet. "I researched human development. This one is fully mature. They just are naturally feeble. Evolution on a death world with no real predators, you see. They never had to become strong. Vex Thor's mandibles twitched. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the highest danger ratings in the known galaxy, but he did not bother correcting the cadet. Let them figure it out themselves, if they lived long enough. The speed trials were the final nail in the coffin of Daniels's dignity. The course was a simple 2-kilometer run on standard gravity. Quaylon finished in 4 minutes and 18 seconds, his legs blurring with that Centauri speed. Gorsa, despite her bulk, managed 6 minutes flat through pure muscular power. Daniels limped across the finish line at 23 minutes and 47 seconds, dead last by a margin so wide it was almost impressive in its own right. The human collapsed immediately after crossing the line, chest heaving, that weird water-based cooling system pouring liquid out of every pore. Vexthor had read about humans sweating in the briefing materials, and thought it sounded disgusting. Seeing it in person confirmed this assessment. It was like watching a malfunctioning cooling unit leak everywhere. 72 hours, Gorsa repeated, collecting credits from cadets who were taking her bet. I am being generous, you understand. That thing will be in medical bay by tomorrow, crying to go home. Vexthor watched Daniels slowly, painfully push up to hands and knees, then eventually to standing. The human swayed, looking like consciousness was a 50-50 proposition, but stayed upright. As he dismissed the cadets for the day, Vexthor found himself pulling up the council directive again, reading the section about humanity's admission. There had to be something he was missing. Some explanation for why the council thought this species belonged here, because based on what he had just witnessed, humanity had absolutely no business at the Galactic Defense Academy. None whatsoever. The classroom sessions should have been a relief after the physical humiliation of the morning, but somehow Daniels managed to make tactical theory even more painful to witness than that gravity chamber disaster. Vexthor pulled up the first scenario, a standard planetary assault simulation that every Academy cadet had run through for the past 70 years. The setup was simple. Hostile force entrenched on a mining colony. 3 approach vectors. Limited air support. Neutralize the enemy. Secure the facility. Minimize collateral damage. Basic stuff. Gorsa immediately suggested a frontal assault with heavy armor support. Quaylon proposed a rapid infiltration strike at the command center. Karesh calculated optimal firing solutions for orbital bombardment, followed by ground mop-up operations. All solid, traditional approaches that showed the cadets understood fundamental combat doctrine. Then Daniels raised a hand. Yes, cadet, Vexthor sighed, already bracing himself. Where are our supply depots positioned, sir? The classroom went quiet. Several cadets turned to stare at the human like Daniels had just asked what color the sky was. This is a tactical assault scenario, Cadet Daniels. Vexthor explained slowly, wondering if perhaps humans processed information differently than other species. We are evaluating combat approach vectors, not logistics management. Right, but sir, Daniels continued, apparently immune to social cues, the scenario says limited air support. That means contested airspace, which means resupply is going to be difficult. So, where are we caching ammunition and medical supplies? And what is our fallback position if the initial assault fails? Gorsa made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snort. If the initial assault fails, human, you will be dead. That is what happens when you lose battles. You do not get to fall back and try again. The objective is victory, Cadet, Vexthor added, his patience already wearing thin. Not planning for defeat. Daniels nodded but looked unconvinced, which was somehow even more irritating than arguing would have been. The next scenario involved a hostage rescue on a space station. Quaylon outlined a beautiful rapid strike plan, hitting 3 locations simultaneously to prevent enemy communication and response. Daniels raised that hand again. What is the crew rest rotation, sir? Vexthor felt his secondary eyes twitch involuntarily. Explain your question, Cadet. Well, the scenario brief says the operation is expected to last 18 to 24 hours. Most species suffer significant combat effectiveness decline after 12 hours without rest. So what is our rotation schedule? And where are the designated rest areas secure from enemy counterattack? Teresha's crystalline body made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane, which Vexthor had learned was void-born laughter. The human is concerned about nap time during a combat operation. Perhaps we should also pack comfort blankets and bedtime stories. The classroom erupted in chittering, clicking, and various species-specific sounds of amusement. Cadet Daniels, Vexthor said, his translator probably not quite capturing the level of exasperation in his voice. Warriors fight until the objective is complete. Rest comes after victory, not during the battle. But sir, fatigue leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to casualties. I am just trying to minimize preventable losses. The only loss I am concerned about preventing, Goraz rumbled, is the loss of my sanity listening to this nonsense. The scenarios continued. Each time, Daniels asked questions that made Vexthor want to bang his head against the tactical display. Where were the medical evacuation routes? What was the contingency if communications went down? Had they calculated ammunition expenditure rates? What about equipment maintenance schedules? It was like the human could not think about combat without simultaneously thinking about everything that could go wrong. Every boring logistical detail, every unglamorous support element that real warriors simply handled on the fly. You know what your problem is, human? Quillon said after Daniels asked about water purification systems during a desert warfare scenario. You think too much about surviving. Warriors think about winning. Vexthor dismissed the class early, his teaching reserves completely depleted. As the cadets filed out, he heard them placing additional bets, this time on whether Daniels would wash out from physical failure or just quit from being too scared to actually fight. Vexthor was beginning to lean toward the latter. The human seemed absolutely terrified of everything, constantly planning for failure, obsessing over worst-case scenarios like some kind of professional worrier. This was not warrior material. This was a logistics clerk who had wandered into the wrong building and was too stubborn to admit the mistake. The combat simulation arena was Vexthor's favorite part of academy training, mostly because it separated the cadets who talked a good fight from the ones who could actually perform under pressure. The setup was straightforward: automated defense systems protecting a central objective, non-lethal but definitely painful ammunition, and a 20-minute time limit. Succeed, and you moved forward in the program. Fail, and you got to enjoy several hours in the medical regeneration tanks explaining to your bruised ego what went wrong. The cadets stood at the entrance to the arena studying the layout on their tactical displays. Vexthor had designed this particular scenario himself, and he was rather proud of it. 3 automated turrets covering overlapping fire zones, sensor nets that would track movement and heat signatures, and a central core that needed to be physically touched to complete the objective. Simple in concept, brutal in execution. Standard rules apply, Vexthor announced, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. You go in one at a time. I want to see individual performance, not team coordination. Automated systems will reset between runs. Who wants to go first? Gorza, predictably, volunteered immediately. The Thraxian cracked her knuckles, which sounded like small explosions, and stomped into the arena with all the subtlety of a cargo freighter attempting atmospheric re-entry. Her approach was, in a word, magnificent. She simply charged straight at the objective, tanking hits from all 3 turrets with her armored hide, bellowing what Vexthor assumed was a Thraxian war cry that roughly translated to something about everyone's mothers and their questionable life choices. She reached the core in 47 seconds, slapped it hard enough to crack the casing, and emerged looking barely winded despite taking 16 direct hits. Time to beat, human, she called out to Daniels, grinning with way too many teeth. 47 seconds. Try not to die in the first 5. Quillon went next, and it was like watching liquid mercury navigate an obstacle course. The Centauri moved so fast the automated turrets struggled to track him, their targeting systems constantly recalculating firing solutions that were outdated before they could execute. He dodged, weaved, and practically danced through the kill zone, completing the objective in 39 seconds without taking a single hit. Krish's approach was entirely different. The Voidborn simply phased partially out of normal space, becoming translucent and nearly impossible for the sensors to lock onto. The turrets fired sporadically, their rounds passing through Krish's crystalline form like light through a prism. 42 seconds, 0 hits sustained. Then came Daniels. The human stood at the entrance for what felt like an eternity, those strange eyes scanning the arena with an intensity that Vexthor might have found promising if it was not so obviously driven by fear. Daniels was mapping everything. Vexthor realized every turret position, every sensor node, every piece of cover, every single environmental element. "Sometime today, Cadet," Vexthor called out. "The objective will not complete itself." Daniels nodded, took one deep breath that seemed to use the human's entire lung capacity, and moved, and immediately went sideways, not toward the objective. Sideways, toward a maintenance panel on the arena wall that Vexthor had honestly forgotten was even there because nobody in 15 years of running this simulation had ever paid attention to it. The turrets tracked Daniels's movement, firing in precise bursts that the human barely avoided by diving behind a barrier that was designed to provide minimal cover. Daniels hit the ground hard, rolled in a way that looked extremely painful, and somehow ended up at the maintenance panel. "What is the human doing?" Gorza muttered, watching the display with obvious confusion. Daniels popped the panel open, and Vexthor suddenly had a very bad feeling about where this was going. The environmental controls for the arena were behind that panel. Temperature, humidity, atmospheric composition, and yes, the lighting systems that the turrets used for secondary targeting when heat signatures were unclear. Daniels started pulling cables. "That is cheating," Koresh observed, though their tones suggested more curiosity than actual accusation. "That is not cheating," Vexthor said slowly, checking the scenario rules on his display. "That is creative problem solving. All arena systems are technically part of the combat environment. I just never specified they were off limits because no one has ever been stupid enough to try this." The lights cut out. The arena plunged into darkness, and the automated turrets immediately switched to thermal tracking, which worked great. Except Daniels had apparently anticipated this, because the human had grabbed a thermal blanket from an emergency kit, also in that maintenance panel, that was supposed to be there for safety regulations. Wrapped in the thermal dampening material, Daniels became effectively invisible to the turret systems. Vexthor watched on the instructor's display, which had multiple spectrum imaging, as the human crawled slowly and painfully across the arena floor. It took forever. The other cadets were getting visibly bored. Gorsa actually sat down and started filing her claws, but Daniels kept moving, inch by agonizing inch, completely hidden from the automated systems that were now firing randomly, hoping to get lucky. At the 9-minute mark, Daniels reached the objective. The human's hand emerged from under the thermal blanket, slapped the core, and the simulation registered completion. The lights came back on, revealing Daniels lying flat on the arena floor, still wrapped in the emergency blanket, breathing like someone who had just run a marathon while being chased by something hungry. The timer read 9 minutes and 17 seconds. Pathetically slow compared to the other cadets, but it was a completion. The human had completed the objective. "Luck," Quillan said immediately, his chrome exoskeleton reflecting the arena lights. "Pure, dumb luck." The human stumbled into a solution by accident. "Agreed," Gorza added. "There is no way that was intentional strategy." Daniels probably panicked, saw the panel, and randomly started breaking things. Koresh's crystalline form shimmered thoughtfully but said nothing. Vexthor studied the replay footage, watching Daniels' approach frame by frame. The way the human had moved, the deliberate path to the maintenance panel, the specific cables pulled in a sequence that suggested knowledge of arena systems architecture that was definitely not in the standard cadet briefing materials. This had not been panic. This had been planning. Vexthor looked at Daniels, who was now sitting up, slowly unwrapping from the thermal blanket with hands that shook from either exhaustion or adrenaline or possibly both. "Acceptable work, Cadet," Vexthor said, keeping his tone neutral. Unorthodox, but within the parameters of the exercise. The human nodded, not quite meeting his eyes, and shuffled out of the arena to rejoin the other cadets who were already dismissing the performance as a fluke. But Vexthor found himself pulling up humanity's military records again, specifically the battles where human forces had won against superior opponents. Proxima Centauri, Terra Nova, the Kepler conflict. In every single engagement, human forces had won not through superior strength or speed or technology, but through approaches that enemy commanders had not anticipated. Unconventional tactics. Environmental manipulation, using the terrain and available resources in ways that other species had not considered. Vexthor's mandibles clicked slowly. Maybe the human was not just lucky. Maybe, and this was a disturbing thought, the human was actually thinking. He was not ready to admit that out loud yet, but the possibility nagged at him as he watched Daniels limp toward the medical station for some minor wound treatment. The possibility nagged at him quite a bit. The sparring ring was where reputations got built or shattered, and Gorza had apparently decided it was time to shatter the human into very small, easily disposable pieces. "I volunteer to spar with Cadet Daniels," the Thraxian announced during the next day's hand-to-hand combat session, her voice carrying across the training hall with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing free food or unexpected holidays. Vexthor's mandibles twitched. This was not going to end well. Thraxians outweighed humans by a factor of 3, had bone density comparable to composite armor plating, and considered broken ribs a sign of affection among friends. Putting Daniels in a ring with Gorza was less a sparring match and more an anatomical demonstration of what happened when soft tissue met overwhelming force. "Cadet Daniels," Vexthor said carefully, giving the human an out, "you are not obligated to accept challenges above your weight class." Daniels looked at Gorza, then at Vexthor, and in what was becoming a disturbing pattern of poor decision-making said, "I accept, sir." The crowd that gathered around the sparring ring appeared within seconds, because cadets could smell imminent entertainment the way predators smelled wounded prey. Vexthor heard credits changing hands, odds being calculated, and someone, he was pretty sure it was Quilon, started a betting pool on how many hits Daniels would take before losing consciousness. The over-under was set at 3. Gorza stepped into the ring, rolling her massive shoulders, each movement showing muscles that could probably bend steel beams. She was grinning, which on a Thraxian face looked disturbingly similar to a threat display, because it basically was. Daniels climbed through the ropes looking like someone heading to their own execution who had decided to maintain dignity through the process. The human was already sweating, that weird water cooling system activating before the fight even started. "Standard sparring rules," Vexthor announced, though he suspected this would be over too quickly for rules to matter. "Non-lethal contact only. Fight continues until submission, unconsciousness or instructor intervention. Begin." Gorza did not waste time with strategy or technique. She simply charged forward like a biological battering ram, swinging a fist the size of Daniels's head in a roundhouse punch that had enough force behind it to dent bulkhead plating. Daniels ducked, barely. The human dropped so low and so fast that Vexthor actually heard vertebrae pop, but the fist sailed over Daniels's head with maybe 2 inches of clearance. The crowd made a collective sound of surprise. Gorza, thrown off balance by hitting nothing but air, stumbled forward, and Daniels did something absolutely suicidal. The human lunged in close, inside Gorza's guard, and drove an elbow into the Thraxian's lower ribs. It was like watching someone attack a mountain with a particularly optimistic toothpick. Gorza did not even flinch. She grabbed Daniels by the shoulder with one massive hand and threw the human across the ring like someone discarding a piece of trash. Daniels hit the mat hard, bounced once, and Vexthor was already moving to call the match when the human rolled over and stood back up. "Huh," said Krillon from the crowd. Still conscious, I did not anticipate that. Gorza charged again, and this time connected with a body blow that sounded like a hammer hitting meat. Daniels folded around the impact, all the air exploding out of those lungs in a sound that made several cadets wince in sympathy. The human went down to one knee, gasping, definitely hurt, probably with cracked ribs at minimum, and then stood up again. "Stay down, human," Gorza said, and she actually sounded concerned now. "You are just hurting yourself." Daniels responded by spitting blood onto the mat and raising both fists in a guard position that looked frankly terrible from a technical standpoint but showed absolutely zero intention of quitting. What followed was less a fight and more a systematic demonstration of human stubbornness versus Thraxian confusion. Gorza hit Daniels. Daniels went down. Daniels got back up. Repeat. Again and again. The crowd's cheering slowly died down as the pattern continued. This was not entertaining anymore. This was uncomfortable. Watching Daniels take hit after hit, seeing that small body absorb punishment that should have ended the fight a dozen times over, and just keep getting back up was disturbing on a fundamental level. "What is wrong with it?" Koresh asked, their crystalline voice carrying a note of genuine confusion. "Does the human not understand that it has lost? The match is clearly decided. Why continue?" But Vexthor was beginning to understand something the cadets had not figured out yet. Daniels was not trying to win through superior strength or speed. The human was weaponizing endurance. Every time Gorza threw a full power punch and Daniels survived it, the Thraxian's confidence eroded a little bit more. Every time that small body got back up when it should have stayed down, doubt crept in. Gorza was getting tired, not physically, not yet, but mentally. The Thraxian's punches were becoming hesitant, pulled slightly, because hitting something that refused to quit was not glorious combat anymore. It was starting to feel like bullying, and Thraxian warrior culture had strong opinions about honor in combat. Daniels, meanwhile, had stopped trying to avoid the hits entirely. The human was taking them at angles, rolling with impacts when possible, turning what should have been fight-ending blows into merely terrible ones. It was like watching someone negotiate with physics, making deals with momentum and force distribution that should not have worked but somehow did. At the 7-minute mark, something shifted. Gorza threw another punch, heavy but slower than before, telegraphed with exhaustion and reluctance. Daniels slipped inside it, moving on what had to be pure instinct, because those eyes were nearly swollen shut, and struck, not hard, not compared to what Gorza had been dishing out, but Daniels hit the Thraxian's throat, a precise strike to one of the few vulnerable points on that armored body, and Gorza made a choking sound and staggered back. The human followed, moving like a zombie, like something that should have been dead but had forgotten to fall over, and hit Gorza again, and again. Nothing powerful, nothing impressive, just relentless, determined strikes to vulnerable points that the Thraxian could not fully protect while also trying to breathe. Gorza dropped to one knee, gasping, and raised a hand in the submission gesture. The training hall went absolutely silent. Daniels stood in the center of the ring, swaying like a tree in a strong wind, blood dripping from a split lip, both eyes swelling shut, ribs almost certainly broken, and absolutely victorious. Vexthor stepped into the ring and raised Daniels's arm in the traditional victory acknowledgement, and the human immediately collapsed, unconscious before hitting the mat. The crowd remained silent as medical personnel rushed in to stabilize both combatants. Nobody was celebrating. Nobody was laughing. Everyone was staring at the small, broken body being loaded onto a stretcher, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with everything they thought they knew about how fights were supposed to work. Gorza, being helped out of the ring by her seconds, stopped and looked back at Daniels's unconscious form. "That thing is not right," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silence. "That thing should not be possible." Vexthor checked his data slate, looking at the updated betting pools. Every single one had been closed. Nobody wanted to bet against the human anymore. Nobody was entirely sure what they had just watched, but they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They did not want to fight it themselves. The final examination at Galactic Defense Academy was a 72-hour war games exercise that typically left at least 30% of cadets in medical regeneration and another 20% reconsidering their career choices. Vexthor had designed it to be brutal, unforgiving, and as close to actual combat as you could get without real casualties. It was, he felt, his masterpiece of controlled suffering. The exercise scenario was straightforward on paper. Contested territory, enemy forces with superior numbers and positioning, limited resources, and victory conditions that required both tactical brilliance and physical endurance. Most squads failed. The ones that succeeded usually did so by narrow margins and sheer luck. When the automated assignment system designated Daniels as squad leader for Team 7, Vexthor assumed it was a computer error. "Sir, with respect, this has to be a mistake," Quilon said, his chrome exoskeleton reflecting the briefing room lights as he gestured toward Daniels. "The human can barely handle individual exercises. Leading a squad through war games? We might as well forfeit now and save ourselves the humiliation." Gorsa, her ribs still wrapped from the sparring match 3 days prior, nodded agreement. "I will follow orders, instructor, but I am stating for the record that this is a terrible idea. Daniels thinks like a logistics coordinator, not a combat leader." Kuresh simply shimmered in what Vexthor had learned was Voidborn skepticism, saying nothing but clearly thinking plenty. Daniels stood at the front of the squad, holding a data slate with the mission parameters, looking exactly like someone who had been handed a live explosive and was not entirely sure which end was which. The human's eyes, still slightly bruised from the Gorza fight, scanned through the briefing materials with that same intensity Vexthor had noticed before. That look of someone calculating every possible disaster and trying to plan for all of them simultaneously. "Right," Daniel said finally, voice quiet but steady. "Here is what we are going to do. First, we establish a primary base camp here." The human pointed to a position on the tactical map that was absolutely not where any competent commander would set up, and 2 fallback positions here and here. We are going to pre-cache supplies at all 3 locations. Ammunition, medical supplies, rations, and water. "That is a waste of time," Quilon interjected. "We should be planning our assault vector, not playing supply clerk." "Second," Daniels continued, ignoring the interruption with what Vexthor was beginning to recognize as practiced ease, "we operate on 4-hour rotation shifts. Nobody goes more than 4 hours without minimum 2-hour rest periods. I do not care how alert you feel. Fatigue kills, and I want everyone sharp." Gorza made a derisive sound. "We are warriors, not children who need scheduled nap time." Third, Daniels pushed forward, still not arguing, just stating the plan like it was inevitable. "We establish 3 escape routes from every position we occupy. We scout them in advance. We mark them clearly. If something goes wrong, and things will go wrong, nobody panics because we already know where we are going." Kuresh's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been frustration. "This is the most paranoid, overcautious, cowardly approach to combat planning I have witnessed. Where is the offensive strategy? Where is the plan for victory?" Daniels finally looked up from the data slate, meeting Kuresh's multifaceted gaze. "The plan for victory is that we all survive long enough to actually win. You want offensive strategy? Fine. We hit the enemy here," pointing to a location on the map, "but only after we have fallback positions prepared, supply caches established, and rest rotations scheduled. Because when the enemy counterattacks, and they will counterattack, I want us ready for it instead of exhausted and trapped with no ammunition and no option." The squad spent the first 6 hours of the exercise doing exactly what Daniels ordered, and they hated every minute of it. Vexthor watched on the command observation feed as Team 7 laboriously hauled supplies to cache points, scouted escape routes, and established positions that seemed designed more for retreat than assault. Other squads were already engaging enemy forces, racking up impressive tactical victories. Team 7 was digging latrines and organizing medical kits. "This is embarrassing," muttered one of the other instructors monitoring the exercise. They look like they are setting up a camping trip, not running a military operation. Vexthor said nothing, but he was watching Daniel's approach with growing fascination. The ambush hit at hour 17. Team 7 had just completed their first objective, a minor enemy outpost, when the trap sprung. Enemy reinforcements, significantly more than intelligence had suggested, hit them from 3 directions with coordinated fire that should have ended the exercise right there. Should have. Except Daniels had already positioned the squad with clear sightlines to escape Route 2, the one they had scouted and marked 14 hours earlier. The human did not hesitate, did not try to fight, just called the retreat to fallback position Alpha, and the squad moved like they had practiced it, because they had, twice, during those boring preparation hours. They reached the fallback position with 0 casualties and found ammunition and medical supplies waiting for them, right where Daniels had insisted they cache them. The enemy pursued, expecting a demoralized, scattered force. Instead, they found a rested, resupplied squad in prepared positions with clear fields of fire and multiple escape options. Team 7 held for 6 hours, rotating defenders so nobody got too exhausted, using pre-positioned supplies so they never ran low on ammunition, and when the position became untenable, they withdrew in good order to fallback position Beta, where more supplies waited. By hour 40, other squads were dropping out of the exercise, overwhelmed by attrition, exhaustion, and poor resource management. Team 7 was still operational, still cohesive, still fighting because Daniels had spent the first 6 hours preparing for everything to go wrong. They completed the exercise at hour 68 with full squad integrity, all objectives secured, and ammunition to spare. Vexthor checked the historical records. Team 7 had just achieved the highest performance rating in Wargames exercise history. Led by the weakest, slowest, most paranoid cadet in the entire academy, the human who everyone had expected to wash out in 72 hours. Vexthor's mandibles clicked slowly as he watched Daniels brief the squad on lessons learned, already planning improvements for next time, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Maybe, just maybe, the council had known exactly what they were doing when they admitted humanity to the academy. That was a disturbing thought, a very disturbing thought indeed. Graduation day at Galactic Defense Academy was typically a moment of pride for Vexthor, watching cadets he had trained step forward to receive their commissions, knowing he had helped forge them into proper warriors. This year, watching Daniels walk across that stage to accept honors for tactical excellence, Vexthor felt something entirely different. He felt concern, deep, profound, keep you awake at night concern, because he finally understood what he was looking at. And it was not what he had expected at all. Humanity was not producing warriors who excelled in any single dimension. Daniels was not the strongest, not the fastest, not the toughest, not even the smartest in terms of raw processing power. On every individual metric the Academy measured, humans ranked somewhere in the middle of the pack at best, completely unremarkable. But that was exactly what made them terrifying. Humans were not specialists. They were generalists taken to a level that Vexthor had not believed possible. They could think tactically while bleeding out. They could adapt to situations faster than species with triple their neural processing speed. They could endure pain that would incapacitate others and keep functioning. They planned for failure while simultaneously working toward victory. They were creative and paranoid and stubborn and adaptable all at the same time. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved to be exceptional at something specific. Thraxians had strength. Centauri had speed. Voidborn had environmental immunity. Everyone had their niche, their advantage, their thing that made them dangerous. Humans had decided, apparently through sheer spite and poor evolutionary planning, to be mediocre at everything, which somehow made them excellent at adaptation. You could not outthink them, because they would out-endure you. You could not outfight them, because they would outthink you. You could not intimidate them because they were too stubborn to quit. You could not predict them, because they approached problems from angles that made no sense until suddenly they worked. Vexthor watched Daniels shake hands with the Academy Commandant, that same unremarkable human who had limped into his training hall months ago looking like easy prey. The commandant was announcing Daniels's first assignment, tactical advisor for the 3rd Fleet, one of the most prestigious positions available to new graduates. The other instructors were applauding politely, still not quite understanding what Vex Thor had figured out. Humanity had not sent their best warrior to the academy. They had sent an average one, which meant there were billions more just like Daniels back on Earth. And the galaxy had just collectively made a terrible mistake by giving them military training and accepting them as equals. Vex Thor's mandibles clicked one final time as he watched Daniels leave the stage, already talking to other graduates, already planning, already thinking ahead. The galaxy had spent decades debating whether humanity deserved a place among the warrior species. Vex Thor now understood the real question should have been whether the galaxy was ready for what happened when you gave humans that place. He suspected the answer was no. They definitely, absolutely, without question, were not ready. And that realization, more than anything else in his 20 years of teaching, genuinely frightened him. The human problem, as he was starting to think of it, was just beginning. And nobody had seen it coming. Nobody at all.